Followers of the Africa Integration Think Tank, our followers on the Africa Integration News Agency, we want to say most welcome to this interview today. It is an interview that is dedicated to the 1994 genocide against the Tutsi. We are in the period of commemoration, 100 days, commemorating what happened 30 years ago, a genocide targeting the Tutsi ethnicity. This comes out on the heels of remarks by the President of Uganda, who during the Global Refugee Forum in Switzerland, in Geneva, he acknowledged the gaps in the governance system in Africa that has led to individuals exploiting these weaknesses and having a humanitarian crisis on the continent. The other day, during his speech at the Kwibuka 30, President Paul Kagame mentioned that there are countries, even in Africa, that are fueling the tribal ethnicity conflict in the Eastern DRC, and which has led to the continued, I should say, a genocide, because this is about killing a targeted ethnicity in the Eastern DRC. Though it hasn't got as much publicity, like we see in the Ukraine versus Russia war, and then we have Israel versus Palestine. People are killed silently. And these are issues that we want to bring out to the open so that we have conversations about what is happening. To discuss this topic with me is Honorable George Odongo. Honorable George Odongo is a member of the East African Legislative Assembly, and we are going to be talking about these issues. How ready is our government? Because there have been loopholes, seeing some countries on the continent not minding at all. They read the signs, but never act on these signs. I want to welcome you, Honorable George Odongo, to the interview.
Thank you very much.
We are glad to have you here. My name is Gashegu Muramira, the Executive Director of the Africa Integration News Agency and the Africa Integration Think Tank. In studio today is Honorable George Odongo, a member of the East African Legislative Assembly. We want to welcome you, Honorable.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Gashegu.
Yes, we're glad to have you. Honorable, we've had the government of Rwanda dedicating time to commemorating and making sure the notion of never again is upheld by not only people in Rwanda, but elsewhere in the world. The governments of Uganda and Rwanda have dedicated as priority the issue of peacekeeping. So peacekeeping means deterring anything negative in terms of deterioration of peace on the continent. We see some of these things happening. There's been a narrative that this is mainly from the West, but we also see tendencies in Africa and in East Africa in particular. You as a member of the EALA, do you see these things happening? As an assembly, what are you doing to deter some of these things from happening?
Thank you so much, Gashegu, for inviting me to be your guest today, and specifically to focus our attention on the 30 years of Kwibuka, the commemoration of the genocide against the Tutsi in Rwanda. Last week I had the honor to be the guest speaker at the Kwibuka, and we focused our attention on the capacity of our partner states and state parties to the Genocide Convention to deal with genocide in all its guises. Indeed, it is very important that partner states, particularly the East African Community partner states, should address themselves to the infrastructure that potentially drives genocide. Because genocide does not exist in a vacuum. Genocide, from all the experiences and research globally, has a tendency of beginning with hate speeches, which intensifies, builds up, and eventually explodes into a genocide against a specific ethnic group. We have got to be alive to our current situation in the region, and be able to raise our antennas high to listening and be able to decode the sound bites that are coming from our different regions within the East African community, and be able to detect those that have the potential of brewing and eventually exploding into a genocide. So it is a responsibility that we take very seriously as members of the East African Legislative Assembly, but most importantly, it is something that we are sounding the partner states to be alive to, so that we do not have a repeat of what happened in Rwanda in 1994, when everybody claimed they were caught unawares, and yet the potential was there, the signals were there. We had the presence of the United Nations troops in the country, and they were able to detect that this was a situation that was happening, but we did not respond in time, and eventually that happened. So as members of EALA, and indeed as leaders of the East African community, we need to be able to build the capacity of our partner states to be able to detect and act. It's not enough to just detect. It should also be within our capabilities to respond, and respond effectively and at the right time.
Okay.
So if you ask me, what are we doing as the East African community? We have raised these matters. We have a peace and security sector that is actively engaged in detecting and making sure that the early warning signals are sent out to the different partner states on a broad range of peace and security matters. And this being a critical area of our concern, the peace and security sector is at the moment trying to build capabilities around detection, early warning, and eventually prevention of a genocide.
Okay.
Yeah.
Like we said as we are starting, we want to dedicate this interview to the 1994 genocide against the Tutsi, and the DRC, the Democratic Republic of Congo, is still home to remnants of the genocidal forces. They still operate in the Eastern DRC. In his recent speech at the Kwibuka, at the commemoration of the 1994 genocide against the Tutsi, President Paul Kagame was categorical on this. And if you may, I'll quote him. He said, "We see too many actors, even some from Africa, getting directly involved, as tribal politics is given renewed prominence and ethnic cleansing is prepared and practiced." As EALA, are you simply saying you're working on detection and reading and helping read the early warning signs? Are we just seeing this as a talk show? Why aren't we seeing action in place? FDLR, the genocidal forces, have been DRC for a long time. The EAC has been there. Up to now, we see genocides happening, targeting a particular ethnicity. What is EAC coming up as concrete actions?
I want to agree with you that the EAC has got to respond effectively on all matters concerning peace and security, but very specifically to the potential of genocide that you talk about in the Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo. Like I said earlier on, that our peace and security architecture has got to build capabilities around the complex nature of peace and security, particularly in our region. The DRC, the Eastern DRC, is a spaghetti of sorts. You know, there are multiple tendencies that have emerged within the DRC. Unfortunately, what we are not confronting head-on is how the different tendencies and interests are coalescing around certain forces that could eventually that disguise themselves and eventually could lead us into a potential genocide situation. It is our responsibility as the East African community, particularly us as a region that has experienced genocide before, to take interests and not to be opinion neutral on matters of genocide and its potential. I have said this before and I want to repeat it here, that we should never be opinion neutral on a situation that has a potential of exploding into a genocide, because we saw the consequences of it in 1994 when we outsourced our responsibility to a multilateral force that ended up watching as our people were butchered. It is the reason why we came together as the East African community. First, to make sure that we build capabilities around our defenses, to defend our sovereignty, to defend our people, and to secure them. So we must speak with one single voice, that what we hear, the sound bites that we are hearing from the Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo, are not political statements. They are statements that have a clear direction towards a genocide, because they are very specific, targeting ethnicity.
Yes.
The weaponization of our ethnic identities in the Eastern DRC is a matter that should concern all members of the East African community, and we should actually have the courage to confront it as such. There are times when we have spoken and we want to be politically correct, and I don't think when it comes to matters of genocide we have any option. I think we must abandon the politically correct lines and begin to address the substantiality of the statements that are coming out of the Democratic Republic of Congo, particularly in the Eastern DRC, the kind of formations that are taking place in the DRC, and the indications through the targeted killings. That should raise our antennas high and should begin to trigger action from the East African community for us to be able to stop what can be potentially a very disastrous result for the community. Yes,
I agree. And when you talk about action, I understand. DRC is a partner state of the EAC. EALA is the assembly that does legislation. Have you had time to engage the DRC leadership on some of these issues? Because I know there is a peace process headed by former President Kenyatta that tried to solve this and is trying to find means. But as an assembly, really, have you talked to some of this? Because this is an old problem.
You need to understand the position of the assembly from the context of the structure of the EAC. The assembly provides leadership on legislation, and we do oversight, and we oversight the institutions of the EAC, but also the implementation of that treaty. And we also do representation, amplifying the voices of the ordinary East Africans. In that context, therefore, you'll see that when on matters like this is from our partner states. Our first line of intervention usually is from the institutions of the states that have, by the mandate of the treaty, agreed to work closely together. So we rely so much on the capacity of our different partner states, because of the sovereign nature of our different partner states, to be able to illuminate some of these issues. And once they come into the purview of Parliament, usually we pick it up. Now, we have not addressed ourselves as the assembly on the specific nature of the conflict in the DRC, because it is our understanding that the partner states are using the institutions that they have, and by the very nature of the sovereign of their own sovereignties, that they're using the sovereign institutions to engage constructively. So the assembly hasn't. However, the assembly is alive to the fact that there is now a public call for the East African community to address itself to the situation in the Eastern DRC.
Okay.
And I have had the opportunity to review some of the videos, to review them, to listen to the news coming from the Eastern DRC. I've taken a lot of interest to look at the text that is coming from the Eastern DRC, pertaining the situation in the Eastern DRC. And I'm very much convinced that there is the urgency of the East African Legislative Assembly working with all the other institutions of the EAC and the partner states to deal with the situation in the Eastern DRC. Where I sit, the Assembly has not addressed itself specifically on the potential of violence targeting an ethnic group in the Eastern DRC. But it is a matter that I have picked, and many other colleagues of mine have picked, and has gained traction within Parliament, and therefore is a matter that we are going to put a spotlight on when we meet for this plenary that is coming up in May.
Well, we're just wishing the best for EALA, especially in tackling this problem. Now, this brings me to another segment of this interview, especially on denial of the 1994 genocide against the Tutsi. There's been revisionism, individuals denying. Most recently, we saw the U.S. Secretary of State, Antony Blinken. He posted, and I want to quote what he said. He said, the United States stands with the people of Rwanda during Kwibuka 30 in remembering the victims of genocide. We mourn the many thousands of Tutsi, Hutus, Twas, and others whose lives were lost during the 100 days of unspeakable violence. This is a statement not coming from any ordinary American citizen. It is coming from the U.S. Secretary of State. In your own view, or in your own wisdom, is there a genocide of different ethnicities, as Blinken put it?
A genocide, by its own definition, is a deliberate attempt to exterminate a certain genotype, a certain ethnic group. By him listing all the ethnic groups in Rwanda and calling it a genocide, it's by its own definition wrong, because then it presupposes that that genocide was being that the genocide was being carried out by outside forces against the people of Rwanda. But that was not what happened in Rwanda in the 1994. And let me make this clear. Clarity of culpability of those who are responsible of the key drivers of this criminality is the beginning of closure. And it is the cornerstones of justice. Revisionism only, revisionism and genocide denial is one way of, rekindling and sustaining hate, sustaining hurt, is a key perpetrator of a cycle of violence. Such a statement is unfortunate, and it needs to be called out. We have got to deal with the situation that happened, with the genocide that happened against the Tutsi in Rwanda in 1994, with honesty and clarity. And that will be the beginning of healing and, you know, the beginning of a new chapter for our people. It's 30 years and it feels like yesterday. Why? Because we are struggling with defining what is the obvious. You know, those who are hurting every day are struggling to make the world understand what they went through, while those who did it are sitting out there and are doubting their own actions because there is somebody out there who is beginning to shield them. Africa has got to wake up, and that's why I feel that we do not have the luxury of outsourcing leadership. We must provide the leadership as Africa, and we must provide that leadership from within. Revisionism and denial is the flames that keeps us in bondage of anger, of hatred, and makes us feel like the world has abandoned. We have been abandoned, and we are beginning to read that and you know, we are causing ourselves to be desperate in a situation that we know we saw it for ourselves. So we must begin to change the narrative around this.
Changing the narrative means people learning. We saw ethnic violence in Kenya some years ago, targeting one ethnicity against the other. We've seen xenophobic attacks in South Africa, targeting fellow Africans. Why aren't Africans, especially our leaders, learning from the 1994 genocide against the Tutsi? Because these are early warning signs that a genocide can occur. As a legislator at EALA level, in your view, what do you think? Why is it taking too long for African leaders and Africans? Because this understanding must begin from the African leaders.
We must change the character of our politics and the character of our leadership. Every state reflects the character of its leadership. We must begin as Africa to invest in leadership that is accountable, leadership that is subordinate to the interest of the ordinary citizens. And we have, as Africans, a duty to advance our different countries through equity. Those are some of the lenses with which we must begin to look at our leadership. So the question of our governance systems should start with the quality of leadership, and the clarity of where we would want to go and where such leaders would want to take us.
So who chooses the quality of leadership? Because sometimes African elections are manipulated by those that want to retain power.
So you see, manipulation does not happen in a vacuum. Manipulation has people around it. It has people whom we have chosen. And those people are now the ones trying to manipulate, to perpetrate themselves in power. Again, as I said, we may not have the crystal ball to determine how a leader behaves in future. But we have capacity from looking at the character of each leader that presents himself for an election to tell whether this leader has the necessary qualities that we are looking out for. And we use that bare minimum yardstick to elect that leader, as opposed to Africans, for the most part, transforming electoral politics into a kind of procurement exercise where money is being used, you know, to procure votes, and people go for short-term gratification, not knowing the consequences of the decisions they are going to make in the future. So we need to clean up our leadership. We need to make sure that we begin to sensitize our people to have the minimum competencies, you know, civic competencies, to determine the quality of leadership that they would want going forward. Most of the things that we see in Africa is because we have been let down by leadership.
Like we said, we had remarks from the US Secretary of State. We've had writers who have practiced revisionism openly. Some of them have even written books denying genocide in capitals such as Paris and so many other places. With this current trend of things, people denying genocide happening openly, does it ring a bell on the international community having turned a blind eye when genocide was happening in Rwanda? Does that mean whatever is happening today, in terms of words, people saying these words, some going to the level of actions, God forbid, but if a genocide happened again in any African capital, would we see the international community coming in to help stop it, or they would instead, what do you think?
When you say the international community, the word community presupposes that all of us are part of it, and therefore we have common interests. Unfortunately, the construction of the multilateral system, which includes the United Nations, is largely driven and led by self-interested powerful nations. So the Americas, the Europe, China, call them, all these powerful nations have interests. Those interests are couched in the best language possible, which includes we are part of the international community. But Africans must understand that international relations are not built around friendships. They are built around self-interests. And the permanent interests of the Americas and Europes are their selfish interests. And when they come to Africa, and when they invest, what you would call invest, when they invest in Africa, whether in terms of military, whether in terms of whatever, their overarching interest is basically to secure their national interests. So I am not surprised those countries begin to become targets because Western interests thrive best where there are huge weaknesses.
That's true.
Within our states. So I am therefore not surprised, and I want to make this clear that African countries should begin to mirror each other and work towards building a very powerful African integration so that they have a solidarity against the solidarity of the West. Because the West has a very strong solidarity because they have decided to define what their interests are, and those interests are not African interests at all.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, we continue to request you to keep subscribing to our YouTube channel, the African Integration Think Tank. We request you to keep following our platforms of the African Integration News Agency. Our guest today is Honorable George Odongo. He's a member of the EALA, and we are deliberating on key issues. Honorable, as we come to the end of this interview, political integration versus economic integration, what should come first? We still have non-tariff barriers impeding trade on the continent. And yet, at the same time, we have political issues among its partner states of the East African community. The other day you saw Burundi closing the border with Rwanda. DRC is not as being compliant to the EAC. The other day we saw the lot of money in terms of membership fees that the DRC still has to pay to the Secretariat. Are we having the economic integration in its true sense, or we have to wait for the political integration first?
I do not wish to imagine that you should have one and then have another, because there is context to it. For you to advance economic integration, you should have political goodwill. These are all enablers to economic integration. And yet, economics is good politics as well. That if you have our countries trading together and our people being the net beneficiaries of this thriving trade between the different partner states, it makes for very good politics. Because politics provides us with the institutions, with the legislation, you know, with the superstructure. Basically, you would call it the superstructure of our integration.
Okay.
Is built around our politics. Political economy tells us that, you know, our superstructure must keep changing in response to the changes in our bases.
Okay.
Those bases are how we produce our people, how they socialize, and so on. So we create superstructures to just manage the changing context.
Okay.
So both are important. What we should be doing is actually not to create that binary perception. What we should be doing is calling out our leadership to say that at the political level, we need the goodwill, so that that goodwill becomes the software that drives our relations, whether social, trade, you know, relations. I can tell you, whenever we have had political differences between our leaders, it has affected our trade relations. Whenever we have had, and how we see the future at the political level, it has had ramifications.
Okay.
Because the thinking of the people at the top, you get it, has an impact on how the other state institutions are aligned.
Okay.
So you are going to see where there is political goodwill, you're going to see all the other state institutions having goodwill, and even the ordinary citizens have no problem relating to each other. So the problem usually is at the top, in my view. That as long as we have good political goodwill at the political level. By the way, you don't even need to even federate, if I may say. Federation is at the finest level. But in the interim, we want very good political goodwill, so that everyone is free to move, everyone is free to trade, everyone is, the people of Rwanda, for example, should be free to move from Rwanda, enter the Eastern DRC and go. They are trading. The people from the DRC should be willing to move, come to Rwanda, come to Uganda, go to Kenya, South Sudan, and so on and so forth, because we are seeing the future using the same lenses.
Okay.
The moment we see that there is no goodwill at the political level, there will always be these differences. Now, the DRC is potentially a game changer because of the size of the DRC and the potential that it has. If I may tell you, in 2008, the late President Nelson Mandela had a conversation with President Kabila Sr. and asked him why he shouldn't join the SADC. DRC had not yet been part of SADC at the time. And Kabila said, why should I join SADC? And Mandela told him, said, you know, from Lubumbashi, when I fly from Lubumbashi to Joburg, I will arrive in Joburg, having gone through all these other countries in between, before you arrive in Kinshasa from Lubumbashi. That is how large that country is. But because of the character and the nature of the politics, it has been an extremely difficult project to integrate, to open up the borders. You know, so it has to take leadership. I know integration is not something that happens quickly, but you must demonstrate that leadership by the way you speak, by the way you handle matters of international relations, particularly of neighbors. So this is a call for all the leadership to know that leadership is a very critical ingredient in our integration.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Honorable George Odongo. I think this brings us to the end of our interview. Thank you so much for having found time. George Odongo is the EALA member, East African Legislative Assembly member, representing Uganda at the Assembly in Arusha, Tanzania. We want to thank him so much for having found time to be part of the show.
Thank you so much.
And we hope to invite you again next time to dissect issues.
Thank you.
pertaining to African integration. Today's interview was dedicated to the 1994 genocide against the Tutsi. We are still in the 100 days of commemoration. It was a tough time. We still have genocide survivors who would want to have morale and know that there are people who understand their situation. At the African Integration Think Tank, we shall be there to create awareness, to do advocacy, and to do research on some of these issues in the whole aim of promoting African integration. From us at the African Integration Think Tank, my name is Gashegu Muramira, to say goodbye and thank you so much.